Right. Okay. So look, hello. Yeah, I'm Dr. Thomas Daffin. I'm the chair of this World Intellectual Wisdom Forum. We've been going since 2017 in various iterations, founded in India as a think tank to bring leading thinkers from around the world to debate policy for global transformation. Specifically and particularly focused on peace, but that relates to all the other social crises that are going on, macro and micro, paradigm conflicts, wars, you name it. What can we do about them? And also global warming and environmental problems. So these are all, critical issues that we've been looking at. And we have these monthly forum meetings the 30th of the month. Different speakers come and share on different topics. So this month we're focusing on Africa. We've got various colleagues from the African continent, and I'm sure that we'll have a lively exchange and so on. Let's just start with a few introductions. So that's me. I'm a philosopher and historian, and I was educated in Canada and Britain. I'm a dual national Canadian-British citizen, and I'm a philosopher and specialist in the philosophy of peace. And I was elected in 1990 back in Moscow when we had a brief glimmer of the ending of the Cold War euphoria. I was elected coordinator of philosophers of peace. I've taken that job quite seriously. I'm still in touch with my Russian philosophical colleagues. Unfortunately, we're not able to have direct communication because the situation doesn't allow that. Right, so that's enough from me. Sean, why don't you go next?
Thanks very much, Thomas.
Tell us what you're up to. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello to everyone on the meeting. Yes, I'm Sean English here, and I'm based in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, near Dublin. And my background is in peace studies with Thomas over the years in various organizations and movements, and I've written some books like Thomas on issues related to the general peace questions that arise from time to time. So that's my background. At the moment, I'm involved in a number of peace organizations, World Beyond War, and various organizations like that. And in Ireland here, we're trying to promote Irish neutrality, because neutrality is an issue at the moment because of the war in Ukraine, of course. And the peace movements in Ireland are trying to protect Irish neutrality, because the drift is for Ireland to join with a military alliance like NATO, and we've always been neutral. And we're trying to argue what the benefits of neutrality in any conflict can be. That neutrality isn't staying out of a conflict, we don't have to be quite, neutrality doesn't mean not doing anything. We can actually work within it from a peace perspective, from a neutral perspective. That's the argument in Ireland at the moment. So that's a brief introduction. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Sean. That's an important question. The question of neutrality might well come up in our discussion. So we might want to talk about what actually does neutrality mean because many African countries want to be neutral, but what does that actually mean? We might get onto that. Vincent, are you there with us? Welcome to our meeting. We can't see your picture, but do say hello. Well, Carl, you go first because your father's having trouble connecting. And
sure. I'm Carl. I'm what am I? I'm a part-time student, Cape Town based, somebody who studied a bit of psychology and a bit of film, and kind of interested in the sort of role and potency of both art and peaceful and loving praxis in my generation. Quite curiously thinking about how to potentiate paradigms of peace and love in a way that sort of really tunes into the work and difficulty and complexities that come up with those things. I think we view these things as agreements of goodness in good times, whereas personally I find that those paradigms are actually far more engaging of the fullness of humanity and all its nuance and difficulty. So yeah, just curious to look for or find spaces which are engaging with those paradigms in genuine and sincere ways.
Right. And
Yeah.
you did spend, Carl spent nearly a month here over the winter helping the Institute. That was a great visit. Normally the place is shut here, but Carl decided to fly all the way from Cape Town and spend some weeks here working. So that was great. And we got lots done. So well done. Hope you've recovered.
Yeah, just about it.
Yeah, Vincent, why don't you go next? Now we can see you.
Well,
Just informal introduction, yeah.
good evening, everybody. My name is Vincent. In my present life, I serve as a judge of the High Court here in Cape Town. In my previous life, I was a human rights lawyer with the Legal Resource Center and served on various other legal organizations and NGOs. So I've been invited to this meeting, which is particularly very interesting, but I'm largely an observer given the position that I occupy in the country. So I'm very keen to listen to what Mr. Mlilo has to say and to learn from it. So thank you very much for the invitation. I look forward to listening to it. Thank you.
Greetings, yeah. Welcome. Well done for making it. And yes, let's just introduce the rest. So, Dr. Mishra, would you like to introduce yourself quickly? You'll have to unmute. Yeah.
I am Kaulana Mishra, basically a practicing scientist and also educationist. My interest is basically in science and spirituality and education, but I also have keen interest in how to establish peace in world. So I enjoyed listening on this platform, and thanks to Thomas that he keeps me engaged, and I quite like meeting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome, Dr. Mishra. Greetings. Lester, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself, please? Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. Sorry I'm late. I'm Lester Kurtz. I'm a sociologist at George Mason University, just outside of Washington. And I'm interested in global social thought, violence, nonviolence, and comparative religions. So glad to be with this group. Thank you.
Yeah, and we just had a good class earlier this week, didn't we, Lester?
Yeah,
I hope your students enjoyed it.
Thomas had a wonderful session with our students in our religion and society class.
Right. Yeah. Do you get those questions sent to me, and I'll respond.
I'll do that. I started typing them up, but I'll send. I should just taken a picture and sent them.
The other way is I'll say just give them my email and ask them to send their individual questions direct.
Okay.
You don't have to bother. That'd be easier. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Bharti, last but not least, go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Hello, everybody. This is Bharti Jain from India, a science graduate, MA English and MSc Computer Science with the financial accounting. I'm international coordinator with the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum, Education and Youth Wing. And as I'm keen in science, psychology, and spirituality, so that's why I combined all these three things. As I'm an educationalist and IT specialist, so I combined all my knowledge into one with my research program, Namokal Chim, which is based on science, psychology, and spirituality, connecting mind, body, and soul. To work on 5 personality: physical, mental, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. And the ultimate goal is how to bring peace into the life of their own and the others. And that's why we are working with the youth and women a lot, because we just believe if we touch these 2 sections of the society, we can bring peace into the world, along with this holistic approach to life, which I have invented with which the USP of color and sound healing, which is an essential part of the body. So peace is the ultimate goal of everybody's life. And we are working on SDGs, towards SDGs, mainly health and wellness, education, and peace. And yes, without collaboration, nothing is impossible. That's why we all are here with a single motive, single goal, that is to bring peace into the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bharti. Okay, so welcome. And now TAMSANQA. I think I won't, TAMSANQA is from originally Zimbabwe, but is now living in Johannesburg, I believe, and has been working in mediation and conflict resolution in different organizations and contexts, and runs his own center in Johannesburg. So I'm looking forward to his address. So go for it, TAMSANQA. Do introduce yourself and tell us more. You'll have to unmute, please.
Good evening, everyone, especially those from South Africa, and good morning or good afternoon, those all over the world. I'm TAMSANQA MLILO. I come from Zimbabwe, but now I'm based in South Africa. I've got a deep passion for human rights issues, democracy, good governance, and conflict management, and mediation. So I prepared a short paper, which is I'm going to do it in the form of a PowerPoint presentation. So I will go back to my PowerPoint presentation.
Let me organize for you to share your screen, just a sec. Right, you should be able to share your screen now. I think that's fine. If you click on the left-hand column,
okay. This is the logo of my organization. It's called Mediation for Peace. And this is a paper. I'm going to read through my paper. It's a short paper. This is presented by TAMSANQA MLILO, the Director of Mediation for Peace at World Intellectuals Forum on the 30th of April 2023. Citizens of the world, colleagues and friends, I greet you all in the name of democracy and freedom. It is a wonderful but daunting task that has fallen on me to share a few words by way of addressing this forum, the greatest concourse of men and women concerned about bending global issues in the world. First, I would like to thank Dr. Thomas Duffen and his team for according me this opportunity to be here today. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand here before you not as an expert, but as a humble servant of the people. I'm a Zimbabwean human rights activist, currently resident in South Africa. I have deep passion for human rights work. And for more than 20 years, I've been advocating for respect and inculcation of human rights culture in Zimbabwe and in the region. From mid-1980s, working as the regional coordinator of a membership-based human rights non-governmental organization in Zimbabwe, second capital city, Bulawayo. My work involved civil and political rights outreach programs. We looked into voter education, peace building, conflict management, advocacy, and lobbying. It will be recalled that 75 years ago, the leaders of the world signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In so doing, they laid one of the foundation stones of global institutions that arose from the rubble of the Second World War. They were motivated by the aftershock of the Holocaust and the worldwide determination that governments should never be able to impose this kind of suffering ever again. There have been disappointments since then on all continents. We have seen governments led by political imperatives ignore human rights priorities, and all too often terrible examples of inhumanity which have left us speechless and depressed. Can things ever come right? This is the $6 million question we should ask ourselves. But we need to keep it firmly in mind that the declaration was a breakthrough in that it established an internal acceptance of equality of individuals. Not only did it impose on all governments responsibility to consider how they measured up to a generally accepted set of standards and principles, but more controversially, it opened the way for individuals to monitor, comment on, and develop policies towards the human rights practices of others. The most important part of the Universal Declaration is that it is just that, universal. The 30 articles of the original declaration transcend national, religious, cultural, and ideological frontiers. It is often forgotten that the articles are grouped into two categories, one which covers civil and political rights, and the other equally important category of economic, social, and cultural rights. The 75 years that have elapsed since 1948 have demonstrated all too clearly that human rights are much more than a luxury that can be afforded by countries that are rich. Human rights are indeed of little value without freedom from hunger, from want, from disease, and from economic and social rights are also as important as civil and political rights. Among the ones you can even add wars and civil strife which are taking place around the world as we speak. But the last decades have repeatedly demonstrated that political freedom and economic development are not in conflict, but are mutually reinforcing. The Universal Declaration has been an inspiration for those who campaign for human rights and provide a target for us all to aspire to. Although no country can claim absolute purity, particularly since this is in an area where human nature with all its vagaries comes into play. But it is the responsibility of the government to ensure that the system is staked in favor of individuals. These are some of the pillars of democracy as practiced around the world. They still have a meaning, especially in Africa, where we're still struggling to understand or to live within the culture of human rights and democracy. Genuine periodic elections by universal suffrage and secret ballot, a free and vociferous press, an independent judiciary, the rule of law, a high public awareness of civil liberties and human rights issues, multi-party systems, and adherence to the main international human rights treaties. These pillars are taken for granted in the first world, but in the third world, especially in countries like in Southern Africa, in West Africa, people who are still struggling to enjoy these rights to the fullest. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. A true neighbor will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others. In dangerous valleys and hazardous pathways, he will lift a bruised and beaten brother to a higher and nobler life. Under conditions of repressive stability, one measures the well-being of society by the performance of the government. How repressive are its human rights? Who does it persecute or oppress? How does it plunder assets of society? Under conditions of consensual stability, it would be a mistake to equate the well-being of society with the performance of a democratic government. Sometimes societies make steady and stable progress, not because of, but despite the performance of the government. Democratic governments can sometimes behave so appallingly that the voters simply get rid of them by voting them out of power. All that one can hope for from a democratic government is that it develops the ability to recognize its mistakes sooner rather than later and not repeat them. And what are the most common mistakes? The fact that the duly elected representatives does not automatically give you the competence to make your promises come true. For example, a local councillor does not automatically have the competence to reticulate water, allocate electricity, or administer rates and taxes. And when he or she retrenches or fires officials who have such competence, we have a self-concocted crisis of delivery. The leader appoints those who are compliant and uncritical, support him or her because she or he values control more than performance. Thus, manifestly incompetent cabinet ministers strut around pronouncing nonsense and compound the problem by appointing officials who are of the same liking. A very common mistake. This is witnessed almost all countries in Africa. Young politicians who joined parliament and within a short period became ministers or deputy ministers. Suddenly their whole demeanor changed. The back stiffened, the suits became more expensive, and they pronounced words yes or no as if they were pregnant with profundity. They automatically assumed that because they had authority, they must be clever. As a leader, you know that the cabinet minister sitting next to you he has fingers in the till, but you deliberately divert attention from this person by jumping on a minor of official smuggling goods to show that we are serious about corruption. The rule is simple. The bigger the fish you catch, the more seriously you'll be taken as an angler. Corruption is corruption is corruption. This is also a mistake of repressive governments. But as they are not accountable to anyone but themselves, it resonates far more strongly with democratic government. The absent leader syndrome very quickly translates into a perception of indifference about domestic problems and crises. That an independent judiciary is indispensable for the implementation of human rights and the realization of a working democracy is universally acceptable. For the judiciary to be seen as fearless and independent, it does not have to be anti-government or hopelessly out of touch with the socio-economic and political conditions of the people. It is supposed to serve. The worst thing that can happen to a judiciary is when ordinary citizens no longer consider it credible legitimate or trustworthy. When the ordinary citizens of society and community, women and men, hands down such a verdict on the judiciary, it will signal the beginning of the end of the constitutional state. Unfortunately, some of the judicial officers see the judiciary as the Cinderella of the three arms of government. Independence of the judiciary in any jurisdiction where there is no courage on the part of its officers is meaningless. It's like labor without fruit. The judiciary has a vital role to play in the delivery of social justice to large masses of people. It must give up its old antiquated approach which believes in the policy of restraint and passive interpretation. Civil society is of key importance in relating representatives and participatory forms of democracy. If political society refers to the structures of government or the state, including civic service, then civil society is that network of non-governmental organizations, churches and other religious communities, trade unions, and voluntary organizations, which in modern societies provide the means whereby people can participate in pursuing social goals and protecting interests. When it is functioning best, civil society provides an intermediate layer of governance between individuals and the state that can resolve conflicts. Regular voting to elect representatives is an essential element in the democratic process. But democracy cannot be reduced to a visit to polls every 5 or 6 years. In some countries, it's 7 years. This inevitably reduces democracy to an ideology manipulated by the state. Democracy is rather an ongoing quest for justice, and therefore one whose success is contingent upon the development of moral people who can participate fully in the body politic and institutions which allow for foster such participation. Thus, participatory democracy becomes a way of life, critically complementary and essential to representative government and the state, rather than simply a means to protect self-interest. One of the enduring traits of civic society is the vigilance of always defending the interests of the weak. Civics is about people and guarding against becoming a government lapdog that cherry-pick issues and agendas at the nudging by the government. Democracy will not be a reality, nor can it be sustained in Africa without the creation of a genuinely democratic government and homegrown civic society. Democracy simply means the right of citizens of a country to participate and to make decisions about their lives without hindrance from any power or external or internal. Anyone with the future of this planet will be concerned for the children who face a world growing daily more complex and dangerous from senseless wars and conflicts. As concerns adults, we need to provide an education system that helps children to cultivate within themselves the qualities essential to be a citizen of the 21st century, qualities such as tolerance, willingness to cooperate, compassion, flexibility, responsibility, integrity, and honesty. In 1997, the General Assembly of the United Nations proclaimed the year 2000 as the International Year for the Culture of Peace. In addition, the General Assembly on 10 November 1998 unanimously proclaimed 2001 to 2010 as the International Decade for a Culture of Peace and Non-Violence for Children of the World. To promote a culture of peace and tolerance, this calls for imaginative, innovative, and creative educational approaches. Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. I thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much. TAMSANQA, that was a very inspiring talk. You've given us lots to think about and discuss. Welcome to Loren Weybright, who's just joined us. Loren, do you just want to introduce yourself? Tell us where you're from and all that and what you do. Greetings.
Sorry to join you late, but I am living in Brooklyn, New York City. And I have been for many decades a professor in teacher education. And before COVID, I spent a decade in Nepal and Malaysia working with rural schools and mentoring teachers there. And I met Thomas in the international restorative circle that we meet with every month. And I've been a part of the peace movement and the CRC creative response to conflict for over 50 years. And was very inspired by the talk. And I thank you very much, TAMSANQA. I have difficulty pronouncing your name. TAMSANQA. Say your name for me, please.
TAMSANQA.
TAMSANQA. Okay,
Yes.
thank you so much.
You got it right this time. Yes.
Right.
Thank you for your comment.
Great. Okay, so well, the idea is to have a few responses to your talk. It was, you know, you touched many issues in many areas, and we can go into them. Maybe I'll ask Lester Kurtz to do the first kind of response, because you just gave a talk to the Africa group, didn't you, of George Mutalemwa, which I missed, sadly, as I also missed that by Sean English. But George would have been with us, but his power just cut out. And he emailed me 4 minutes before this meeting started saying, sorry, I can't come, the power's gone. But he's with us in spirit. Lester, do you want to just, you know, respond to what we heard there and maybe give us an overview of what you said at the last Africa meeting? Because, you know, you must have thought these issues through. They're universal, but is there a specific African angle that we can focus on here?
Oh, that was TAMSANQA. Thank you so much for that input, and it's very challenging. And there's so much I don't quite know where to begin. A couple of things stuck out for me. One is you're pointing out the different kinds of human rights, and I think that this is one of the things. Is a long process of untangling the issue of human rights, which tended to be dominated by the West, and what Thomas was alluding to. My grand finale project, which suggests I should be listening rather than talking, is to try to bring the non-Western theory into the mainstream of social theory, because our whole paradigmatic frames in contemporary thought tend to come from the rest, primarily from Europe, kind of filtered through American lens often. But this whole notion of, you know, sort of civic rights versus economic rights, you know, the right to speak and protest and vote versus the right to well-being and livelihood, which I think is something that most people outside of the West understand the significance. You know, if you can't eat, then voting is not as important to you. And so I found that a really significant part of what you were saying. One question that was raised, that you raised in my mind, was also the relation, you know, sort of democracy. You talked about participatory democracy, which I think is a very helpful concept. and the question of where democracy lies. Again, we've tended to get with our Western models, we've tended to think of democracy as evolving around the state. And so democracy happens when you have democratic form of government with representation and voting and all of that sort of thing. But you also talked about the role of civil society in providing democracy. And I remember I call Tanzania my country-in-law because my wife is from Tanzania, so I sort of married into the culture, although I'm still rooted in my American culture and social thought. But Julius Nyerere, he once was complaining. He was getting pressure from donors, Western donors, to have a multi-party democracy in Tanzania, and they had a single party, sort of single party democracy, with very not much room for opposition parties. And Nyerere said people in the village can debate an issue for 6 hours where everybody speaks. But if they don't have a vote at the end, some people say it's not a democracy. And so I'm thinking, maybe part of what we have to think about as we go forward, your way forward, is maybe first of all, maybe fewer people like me talking and more people like you talking, more people like me listening. So I'll stop there. Probably a good place for me to stop.
Well, yes, different. I mean, there's a question there, isn't there, TAMSANQA, for like in African culture, in say the traditions of Zimbabwe and South Africa, is there a democratic structure at village level? I mean, I know Gandhi worked in India with local councils, and in Afghanistan, they have a tradition of the local village has a voice. How does democracy work at grassroots level in Africa, in your opinion, or your experience, I should say?
I'll talk about Zimbabwe. I think it's almost similar here in South Africa. If you go to rural areas, you have got traditional leaders, those who are endowed with wisdom. They will never take all the decisions which are taken. There is a lot of consultation. The consult is not based on education, but it is based on the wisdom which is drawn from the local people or the villagers. They meet and discuss, and at the end of the day, they must reach a consensus. You don't go to the meeting with preconceived ideas. We are not. No one is prejudiced. Even women also participate when it comes to decision making. Even that in African society, especially the traditional way, women are very powerful. They are very powerful, and their voices are respected. And all the decisions which are taken, at the end of the day, there is no win-lose situation. It is done in the best interest of the community or the village. It is not necessarily about individuals, especially in rural areas. It is about what is in the best interest of the community. And whatever decision is taken, at the end of the day, all the community members will be happy and satisfied. It is not about punishment or to find somebody wrong or guilty or to come up with ideas and impose them. People understand that even before the coming of the white men or before the countries were colonized, there was a way of coming up with decisions. It was not based on, it was not a top-down approach. There was consensus building around issues, and they'll find way and try to get the best understanding from the communities. They will accommodate ideas. At the end of the day, the idea is, the solution will be collective. It's not owned by a particular individual, but it is a collective understanding of the way forward. And that would be in the best interest of the community.
That sounds like a very wonderful, idea. It reminds me of the North American Indian culture, where again they used to take decisions in consensus. They would discuss the issue, as long as it took. Women, everyone had a say. The elders were listened to, especially. And then at the end of the day, they would reach a consensus. And in the American Indian tradition, they sat in the lodge in the four directions, north, south, east, and west, which stood for the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And so the people sitting with fire in the direction of the south would speak from the passionate, let's change everything immediately. The people sitting with earth would say, no, let's be cautious and conservative and change slowly as a mountain. People with water would say, how will this affect our feelings? And the people with air would say, I've got a brilliant idea, let's do blah, blah, blah. And they would speak from these different directions to the one purpose, the one cause, and then reach a consensus, which is a totally different way of doing politics than the bipolar kind of, left-right linear approach that we have in Western political thought. I much prefer the American Indian system. And I'm delighted to hear it was there in the African system as well. My question about that is that still there in Zimbabwe? Is that still going on in the villages of modern Zimbabwe, or has it been taken over by something else? Does that still exist, or is that an ideal thing you're describing?
It is still there. It is practiced. Like if you go to Zimbabwe, chiefs are very important. A chief is more important than a politician or a government official. People listen more to chiefs than a politician, because a chief is a permanent structure. But the politicians, they come and go, and the politicians will come and make promises. A chief there's no need for a chief to go out and campaign and lobby to be elected. So that is the advantage of a chief. It moves from one generation to the next generation. It is sustainable. But when it comes to government officials, it's not sustainable. Like their loyalty lies somewhere. It's either within a political party or within government policies. But a chief he is one of the people. So people tend to rely more and consult more and depend to a certain extent on the role of the chiefs. Like a chief will not, he does not operate on his own. He has got advisors, he's got foot soldiers, they've got culture around him and values which drive and directs all the community programs, which are respected by all the communities, because everyone is aware of our values and our culture, what is encouraged and what is not, and how to behave and how to carry ourselves around and how to pass from all our experiences. If there is a bereavement in one family, everyone will come in. But in the Western world, it is each man for himself. But in the rural areas, in the communities where there are chiefs, everyone is involved. If I lose a parent, everyone also will come and join me and sympathize with me. They've got values. People are sensitive, people are understanding. It's what we call Ubuntu, which defines us. It is our daily life. We are not managed by watch. People do not look at the watch to solve their problems. We are not time bound, because we believe that if we don't resolve this today, there is always tomorrow where you can continue with the discussions. There is no hurry. There is no hurry in Africa.
That's very interesting. Yes, I was listening to a talk by a Canadian Indian from Alberta talking about time. In the American Indian tradition, there's only now, yesterday and tomorrow. They don't bother with, like planning everything ahead for months and months because it's got to be solved in the now. So look, this is fascinating. Vincent, Satyen, do introduce yourself, say hello, and maybe just introduce the Wisdom Council's work that we're doing, because that's relevant here. Because if wisdom is the key thing that makes an elder or leader, what is wisdom? Do explain, Satyen, what you've been doing. Welcome. We can't hear you. I think you need to fix the microphone.
How about now?
Yeah, we can hear you fine now. Yeah.
Okay. Greetings, everyone. Blessings. Thanks for having me. Wonderful to see you all. So I'm in Langley, British Columbia, Canada, raised of Indian descent, born in Uganda, Africa, and raised in England, Canada, and then been traveling around the world. So I consider myself quite the person of the world. I have a group of companies underneath my umbrella called Warrior Sage, and I mentor CEOs who are here with positive impact companies. So I help them align themselves and their teams for greater positive impact on the planet, and the same with my own organizations. And I'm also curating a group alongside with Thomas called the Wisdom Keepers, and we meet once a month, and we have wisdom elders from all over the world. And over the last few years, we've been distilling potent, actionable wisdoms for society in various categories, from education to health to well-being to peace, and making sure that we distill the most potent, actionable wisdoms that we can then, from the catter of amazingly collected individuals who are sharing. And we're coming out with a book that'll be distributed and be available for all organizations, systems, education, government, you name it, with the intention of infusing and having wisdom be the core of how we lead our world moving forward, rather than these lesser motives and values, and instilling the depth of wisdom in everything that we do. So that's a little about myself. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Satyen. And so in a sense, what you were saying at the African village level, TAMSANQA, is what we're trying to do on the global level with the World Intellectuals Wisdom Forum, because there's a lot of very clever people on the planet, but they're not always very wise. And sometimes they misuse their intelligence, inventing weapons and telling lies, disinformation and so on. Vincent, can I call on you if you're still listening? Would you like to respond to TAMSANQA put a lot of emphasis on the importance of a judiciary? I mean, would you concur? I mean, how are things in the judiciary in South Africa? I think they're fairly healthy, aren't they? But you may have some philosophical comments. I loved TAMSANQA's saying, he said, democracy is an ongoing quest for justice. I thought that was a brilliant kind of quote. Would you like to comment on the role of the judiciary, because you're involved in it?
Certainly, but if I might just make two comments. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mlilo. That was an extremely wide-ranging and very incisive presentation. But to pick up the point that Lester raised earlier of the indivisibility of socio-economic rights and civil and political rights. One of the strengths we have in this country is that our constitution entrenches not only civil and political rights, but also social and economic rights. The biggest challenge, of course, has been for the realization of those rights. And that responsibility, to a large extent, lies not only with the executive arm of government and the legislature, but also with the judiciary. And so in the judiciary, we've had to grapple with the implementation of socioeconomic rights in our constitution. Those rights are qualified to the extent that they may be progressively realized depending on available resources. So that raises very important and very difficult questions for the actual realization of the rights. And the courts have had to be deferent to ensure that we do not encroach upon the executive nor the legislature when it comes to the actual implementation of those rights. But to the extent that those rights are entrenched in our constitution, there's an obligation on the judiciary to enforce it. So we've attempted in the early years, when it comes to rights such as access to housing, access to water, those are important and very crucial rights in any society. And so the big challenge has been for the judiciary to give meaning and content to the socioeconomic rights in our constitution. And we learn a lot from other countries elsewhere in the world. We look at what has taken place in the Indian jurisprudence, where the socioeconomic rights are guidelines, but raises very important jurisprudential debates for us as judges. And we learn a tremendous amount from India, from the Australian and the Canadian. So those are important issues. To come back to the point about the independence of the judiciary and the strength, that's the cardinal question that faces all countries. Is how strong is the judiciary? And we can look around ourselves, not only in Africa. Sometimes you must only look at Africa and say, is the judiciary strong in Africa? We simply need to look across the Atlantic and see how the judiciary depends on the political vicissitudes of whether you are conservative or whether you're liberal-minded as a judge. And then you do very, very important rollbacks that we've seen in the past couple of months, where the rights of women, abortion rights, have been rolled back by one of the leading judiciaries in the world. How do we explain that? We can't simply explain it by the question of who's in political power at any point in time. How do we ensure that the rights in our constitutions are so entrenched that it never allows a rollback that we've seen in the way we've seen in the past couple of months? But that, I suspect, takes place in very many countries. Suffice to say, in South Africa, our democracy is still very young, it's just less than 30 years. We have an independent judiciary. Our judiciary, as you know, is based on the Roman Dutch traditions, English law, but more importantly, our laws and our statutes are all now fashioned through the prism of our constitution. But just to raise one very important issue is that we went to a Truth and Reconciliation Commission right at the beginning of our democracy in South Africa, and I'm sure many of you know about it. And one of the important issues for us then as legal activists was to ensure that our judiciary, the apartheid judiciary, was held accountable. They refused to go to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The apartheid judiciary refused to account for their conduct under apartheid. And I think that's, to a large extent, will be part of our legacy for many centuries. Their failure to have given an account of why they did what they did, why they ruled the way they did, the judicial philosophy and jurisprudence that they adopted of positivism that allowed people to be discriminated simply on the basis of the color of their skin. And the judiciary was complicit, and they've never taken responsibility for it. But the new judiciary in South Africa, judiciary in a democratic country that is bedrock is the constitution, the importance is building a non-racial society, building a society that the law recognizes the equality of people, understanding the substantive nature of equality, that you need programs such as affirmative action. You need programs such as inequality for women's rights in particular, and importantly also for the LGBTQI plus community and very many other communities in South Africa who've been marginalized. And they come to the courts every day, and we have to protect their rights. And we cannot allow and have any slippage. The rights of women in our constitution are protected. The rights of abortion are protected under our constitution. So we don't have to live by the vicissitudes of a Supreme Court that will one day roll back those rights. The people who drafted the constitution made sure that those rights for the protection of women's rights and reproductive rights are entrenched. But I say too much. So all I'm saying, TAMSANQA, thank you very much for that broad and very enlightening. You raised in your discussion the important value of Ubuntu, and that's a value that you must share, and you must talk to people about, because it's very important. And what it really means is that I am because you are. I exist because I'm part of a community. And TAMSANQA can talk for, I suppose, far better than I could ever do that. But it's an important value that comes from South African pre-colonial society, in which the village exists, but the individual is an integral part of the village. The one important caution that we also have in South Africa is that tribalism doesn't engulf and determine the ways forward. But the values of our pre-colonial societies are very important, and they inform us in the concept of Ubuntu. So thank you very much, TAMSANQA, for having raised those important issues, and I certainly wish you much strength to your arm in the work you do in global peace and mediation. Thank you, everybody, for your indulgence in me giving my 2 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
It's very important. Thank you very much, Vincent. What you say is very important. When I lived in Scotland, I learned about the value of the clans of the Scots. They have a solidarity in Scottish culture, which goes right back to ancient Celtic times. You know, if you were poor or disabled or a widow or something, you were looked after by the clan, and the clan chief had a duty to make sure that everyone, you know, had a decent life. That was all destroyed when the British defeated the clans at the Battle of Culloden, the English state, and they actually abolished the clans. You were no longer allowed to wear your tartan because each clan had its own tartan. And I was shocked. This is what made me suddenly realize, gosh, you know, the Scottish National Party and their bid for independence, that's why they're going for this, because their values of solidarity and community could not sit with the British Conservative government's idea of everything is privatized and it's all money based, you know. So I think, could you tell us a bit more, TAMSANQA, about Ubuntu? Vincent said that's so important. How have you come across, like, were you raised in that tradition yourself in Zimbabwe? Is it still alive as a living tradition?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to expand on Ubuntu. Ubuntu has been with us since time immemorial. And Ubuntu, it guides us in terms of our culture, the type of our culture, the food we eat, the music we play, the dances we practice, the marriages. All those things, they make Ubuntu. You cannot separate the issues. Like if you look at a human being, you cannot take one part and say you are complete. By Ubuntu, it is a way of life. It is a way of living, how we interact, how we engage, how we raise our children, and how we listen to the elders. Like when elders speak, the young ones will listen. There is tolerance. If you talk of Ubuntu, there is understanding, there is compassion. There is I my brother's keeper. Like when I look at you, it is not I and them. It is about we. What we do as a community. We live together, we starve together, we help each other, we raise each other's hand, we mourn together, we support each other. It's like in African families. We find that there is no one who can say, if I want somebody to assist me, I can. It's easy to have the family. You cannot separate and say, this is my brother, this is my sister, or these are my cousins. We are all raised up in one village as brothers and sisters. There is no emphasis on individuals that this is a distant relative. There's nothing distant in our culture. We're an integral part of the society or of the community. So even when we go out to carry out, to go and teach or to facilitate conflict management and mediation or peace building, the communities or the children, they understand what we are talking about because they come from families where we go out, we learn every day. Every day is a learning curve. There's something new every day. A parent is not necessarily somebody who is a biological father to you. Your neighbor, as long as he's older or the same age like your father, he's your father. An elder who is as old as your grandmother, he's your gogo also. You can't say you cannot talk to me, you cannot admonish me or tell me anything because you are not related to me. There are no strangers in the communities. Everyone belongs to the village. That's why if you come as a visitor, the first thing we give you is water, which means we welcome you at home. You cannot come with your own food and say, now I'm eating my food. We share the little which is there in the house. You all share. At times, we rather give a visitor to eat, and you all feel happy. Everyone will be happy at home. You can't say, where is my portion? And you feel more blessed if you share your food. That's part of Ubuntu, and it is not only found in one particular community. It is what is practiced by many African communities in their different languages and cultures. They all practice Ubuntu. And with the colonization, when it came, the first thing they aimed to destroy was the collective way of life of the communities. That's why they used the divide and rule approach, which means there was something to divide when the white men came to colonize the countries. So they, first of all, they to find ways of trying to divide the communities. But some of those traditions were so strong, it was not easy. They were only able to disturb them, but they did not destroy the seed, which is Ubuntu, which is still practiced up to now.
Right, thank you very much. That's very moving. Does anyone else have questions? Loren, would you like to put a question to TAMSANQA or a response? Or Carl, you must have been sitting here thinking about all this. So maybe Carl go first because you heard the whole of his talk. I appreciate your comments.
Hello. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for that. That was very insightful and I think quite on the beat with the complexities of democracy in South Africa. When I say complexities, I really just mean this sort of competing fantasies of the way forward. What to do with the colonial education that we have, and then what are the sort of indigenous pre-colonial values which we need to reintegrate in sort of creating a uniquely South African sort of step into the future. A lot of things that have, I think, come up for me on my side, just like things that I've been thinking through and engaging with, is like, looking at human rights and being a civilian in society, looking at it from the level of policy and law can be quite abstracting, I find. And I feel that, as a feeling of my generation is that not many people kind of understand that they can participate in society in a meaningful way. And that, there's certain avenues of like human rights, which I think that we don't really look at, like, a right to a meaningful existence in South Africa, a right to celebrate life and living. And I think that these things are important in sort of creating a idea or a fantasy of a collective identity which is in tune with life. And it's not necessarily simply just, thinking of reconciliation from a complex history, but moving forward in a way which holds all the different constellations of people, of culture, of history, that this place really does, make home for, or is home to. So yeah, these are things that like I'm, engaged with in terms of like, thinking about social institutions in South Africa and their possibilities and capacities, as, if you think about going to see a movie or going to the theater, people participate in the sort of reconfiguration of meaning, in a view into the world which might inform them about something, or how to organize their experience. And I'm curious about the social institutions like the judicial system, and making that accessible to lay people, to see that sort of transitional areas, as a sort of theater or liturgy with consequence, and as an expression of like South African values, of the Constitution, of our law, but engaged with in real time. I'm curious about those things, and I think it touches on a point that you brought up about being a participant, civic. I think that was the word, right? And how do you make those things accessible to the general public? Like the institution that's founded around Ubuntu, that takes having elders, it takes having leaders, and available and present leaders, that people can go and seek counsel from and be like, yeah, I'm going to this, I'm going to that, this is what's happening, where do I go with all of this? And I think that that's quite vacant in our society. It's just quite, it's been disregarded, and it's created a bit of a lacuna, I think, of just what to do with what we have and where to go. So I really appreciate your notes and comments, giving language to that, expressing it. So yeah. So it's one question I do have for you, is how can an idea of Ubuntu be expressed in Southern African society, where our social system, it's a Western model of an economy, it's a Western model of democracy. How do we incorporate those things, and what does it take to manifest that?
Good question. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you very much, Carl David. I think the starting point would be working with schools. This says better to catch them young. I think if it could be introduced in schools and it become part of our school curriculum, where kids are taught to Ubuntu in a structured way, so that there is consistency in the uniformity, which will help even other schools or even individuals. All children should be introduced to, if they're exposed to these values and teachings, where the community leaders maybe would come to schools and be given sometime, maybe 40 minutes to 1 hour, maybe once a week or 4 times a month, depending on the availability of time, where they can come and share. This can be learned through stories. It can be stories, can be poetry, can be dances. There are many ways of transmission of information without necessarily verbalizing it, where people learn from drums, learn from the music, learn from storytelling, individuals where people come and share their stories, especially the elders, how things were before the Western influence. Western influence has been with us, but it has not been able to replace everything. And one of those things which remained, it is Ubuntu. The template is still there. What is important for people, ability to tap on that knowledge and wisdom while the elders are still alive. That information is very vital and it can be reduced into documentation, can be documented for future generations and for our posterity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I'm a teacher of philosophy and religious studies for many years in schools, and I'd be interested. I mean, I think that's really important, and I'd like Bharti to comment in a minute about education because she's our education coordinator. But I mean, at the moment in South African schools, do the kids get philosophy and religious studies? Do they not? I mean, we in Britain have one period a week where that's exactly what we discuss: values, spirituality, ethics. In Canada too, and most countries in Europe. Do you not have that in already in the schools? Because that would be the place to bring it in. And I'd be happy to talk to any South African educators that want to design a curriculum for that, you know, with your guidance. What's the situation at the moment in schools?
It is not, the schools which do some of it are those, the private schools. It's where you get a bit of that type of exposure. But it is not intense. It is not widespread.
Okay.
I think there is an opportunity, there is a need, there is something which is lacking, and it must be done now, not tomorrow.
Sure. When Carl was visiting me in January, there was a visit by the European Union to Johannesburg, I think, and I know they gave loads of like 100 million euros to teacher education in South Africa because there's a shortage of teachers, and I don't know quite whether they're aware of the need for sort of the spiritual side of education, but I can chase that up. I'll contact the European Union and see, can you give us some of that money to increase that presence in the South African school system, because that's where the values of the culture are going to be transmitted. And that would be important, I think. Bharti, do you want to comment? I mean, you've got a green light here for education. You've been busy with India, but maybe you ought to go and visit South Africa and look at what's going on in the schools there as well and do some teaching.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. And thanks, TAMSANQA. It was a very insightful presentation, and we could know about the education system in Zimbabwe and the human rights thing. You know, we all know that the way youth is going, in the direction the youth is going, is towards non-violence, because the practices they are having in their school, in their environment, and you know, there is a lack of parenting which is very much required, definitely, and peer education is also required in such a situations. And we all know that compassion, peace education, cooperation, collaboration, then this responsibilities, these should be a part of regular curriculum. which is actually not implemented by the government, which is very much essentials for the non-violent future, because youth is our future, and youth is going in totally a different direction towards non-violence. Very few of them who are nurtured in a family who believes in peace, they are taking the path. Otherwise, most of the youth is following the path of non-violence directly or indirectly. So is there anything that is, Thomas, what we in India, what I am doing with the schools is I am running a project in two parts. One is the pilot run with few of the teachers and few of the students below average, average and above average. And I do train these teachers and these students for some activities, for some education that will automatically incorporate this kind of empathy, peace and non-violent activities in their behavior. And what they need to do is after 15 days, these internal trainers will take 1 or 2 minute sessions before every class. Suppose there are 6 classes of 6 subjects, so before every class is when every class starts, they have to give 2 or 3 minutes session before starting the class. That will increase the concentration, that will increase the human values, and that will bring them peace in themselves, that will concentrate their mind, and they will be able to concentrate what teacher is saying, and they will be able to connect with the teachers in a better way, and the results are very good. But the problem we are facing is, yes, we are doing it on our individual pattern, but if government applies it as a part of curriculum, then it will definitely bring a change into the whole system. So my question is, Tamsak, is there any thing in Zimbabwe that you are implementing in schools, or like how has the education evolved in Zimbabwe over the past decades, and what challenges are still remain there with the school system?
Right, thank you.
And is the Zimbabwe taking to ensure that all children has access to quality education regardless of their backgrounds or the socio-economical status? Anything you are implementing in Zimbabwe as a part of curriculum, or?
Thank you, Bharti.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bharti, Jan, Tamina, Jim. Thank you very much for your input. And in Zimbabwe, unfortunately, at the moment, the economy of Zimbabwe is not doing well, because it's still under sanctions from the United States, and so they've not been able to offer much in terms of education. And some of the schools, most of the schools are underfunded, and people who are able to get good education are those who go to private schools, which is only a minority of the people. And the government of Zimbabwe, in the past 20 or 30 years, they've tried to change the syllabus from the country. They moved from Cambridge to something local. And by doing that, they've been able to, unfortunately, the quality of education has been compromised because of there's lack of resources in terms of teachers, in terms of school facilities, in terms of school books. Stationery is not enough. The printed books are not enough. The desk of school furniture is lacking. Some kids, they learn in substandard structures. But the effort is there, the ideas are there, but the means, the tools are lacking. It's not easy to transform education without funding, proper funding. And the unemployment in Zimbabwe is above 80%. Some they say it's 95 or 90. which is so high. Most people are in the informal sector. So it's not easy to sustain education or to pay school fees, which would be at the market value. So the government has not been able to, they try to subsidize, especially primary education. It is subsidized, but you could see there are gaps, which means the government is only to provide basic facilities, and the salaries, the teachers are poorly paid. There's lack of motivation. Most teachers, they've left the profession. You find that somebody who was a teacher today is a farmer tomorrow, because there is more money in farming than in teaching. And those are the challenges which are affecting the country. We don't know when this thing will be resolved. And politicians, the few politicians who are there are also corrupt. The little money which they collect is not properly utilized. It is abused, the funds are abused. So at the end of the day, Zimbabweans are in a catch-22 situation. It is so unfortunate, but people keep on trying. That's why there is a role of the civic organizations as well. They've been able to offer an alternative in terms of some of the schools now. They are funded by the parents and civic organizations who specialize in education. They've been able to fundraise for some of the schools to provide maybe school books, and even those kids who go to primary education days, they need food in the morning. So they're able to provide porridge for school kids and fruits. But it doesn't cover all schools, but some of the schools. These are the efforts and initiatives which have been started by civic organizations to work with some of the schools within the country, especially the rural schools, where there's a lot of poverty and people are so vulnerable that they will need assistance. All assistance is needed, especially in rural schools, where the facilities are barely adequate.
Well, thank you for that sharing. Yeah, it's shocking, really, listening to that. I met an Indian cardinal called Archbishop Angelo Fernandez when I was at a conference on peace at the Vatican years ago. And we talked about, he was the head of the Catholic Schools Association throughout the world, which is a big job. Every Catholic school, any country in the world was under him. And he said to me, Thomas, look, peace education is great, but there are many parts of the world where the kids don't have anything to eat that morning. And what we need to be doing is giving them breakfast before we teach anything at all. So he was well aware of these problems you're talking about. And inspired by him and other colleagues, I set up this thing called Education Aid, which would be a global fundraising initiative for one day a year. All schools and universities and colleges have a day off and just do fundraising. It was inspired by Live Aid, which was Bob Geldof's idea. I'm thinking it's time to really, make that happen through UNESCO. And the other thing, as you were talking, I was thinking about the idea of reverse sanctions. So the reverse strike was invented by a peace activist in Sicily called Danilo Dolci, because in Sicily back in the 60s, there was no money, everything wasn't working, and the mafia were corrupt running the place, right? And so normally the left would say, let's go on strike. But that just made it worse. Nothing got done and they didn't get paid. So he invented the reverse strike. He said, no, instead of a strike, we're going to do extra. We're going to work at the weekend. We're going to rebuild the bridges. We're going to teach extra lessons. So he galvanized goodwill to get the jobs done that the system couldn't do. That's the reverse strike. I'm thinking, the idea popped into my head, reverse sanctions. So, you know, the idea of sanctions is you punish a country because they don't play by the rules. But it seems to me totally self-defeating. And I would like to lobby that education aid always be left out of sanctions. So if you have to sanction a country because it's run by madmen or whatever, fine, you know, do your thing, like Russia or whatever, but not education. I think there's an argument to be made that all sanctions regimes, I'm not really in favor of sanctions, I think it's clumsy. But if they exist, then at least we can say education should be exempted. So I'm shocked to hear that, you know, I don't know, does that mean no aid is coming to Zimbabwe educationally at all? What about the Commonwealth? I mean, you know, I'm shocked. So I'm going to research this and I'm going to try and introduce this concept of reverse sanctions, because surely education is the one thing we share as a planet, you know, and it should be a priority. And teachers should, you know, I'm a committed lifelong teacher, and my mother was a teacher, and I come from a long line of teachers, you know. So I'm gonna see what I can do about the reverse sanctions idea. So tell us more about these sanctions in Zimbabwe, because we're very ignorant when it comes to that. How long have they been in place?
They've been in place since it's almost 20 years. They've been in place for, in fact, it's more than 20 years. They were in place during the time of the late President Robert Mugabe. So he had a problem with the Western world following the invasion of farms within the country. Then after that, the sanctions were imposed. They said it was smart sanctions or targeted sanctions. But interestingly, the people who suffered most are the ordinary citizens of the country. And those in power, they do not suffer from sanctions.
Yeah, this is the problem with sanctions, isn't it? Yeah.
Sanctions is a violation of human rights, because it takes away most of the rights of the people who are innocent.
Yeah.
And if you impose sanctions, it becomes you are giving an opportunity to corruption, which means that the few economic activities which can take place in the country are in the hands of those who are in power. So they still have access to foreign currency. They're the ones who have got access to foreign currency. They are the ones who can access things from outside the country and come, and then they'll bring those items for resale within the country. And once they've got sanctions can only work where politicians, they are concerned about the welfare of the ordinary people. But in countries where those in power do not care what happened to somebody in the streets or in their homes, even if you are starving, they don't care. And the sanctions, they tend to entrench those who are in power, because the rest of the country will be powerless. Those who've got the means are the ones whom we are saying they are targeted sanctions. Like if you put sanctions saying you are not allowed to travel to Washington, maybe sanctions in the 60s and 70s, they worked or they were effective. Now, in today's world, people are no longer going to Washington or London. They can go to Dubai. They can go there and do all their shopping overseas without necessarily going to Washington and London and Paris. They've got other countries now. There are alternatives. Also, they can buy their items online. It is no longer, we don't have to be physically present in Geneva to buy a watch. You can buy that. You can buy that while you are here in Johannesburg, even if you are under sanctions. You can access those. You can use somebody to buy on your behalf. So if you've got money, if you are corrupt, you've got access to all the resources. The people these sanctions really will affect poor people. Poor people and poor countries are the ones, which countries are the ones who suffer most under sanctions.
I have to say that during the Iraq era, after the first Gulf War, huge sanctions were imposed on the Iraqi people, like no medicines and stuff. I totally opposed that in Britain as coordinator of Philosophers for Peace in Britain. You know, I think that was criminal. That it led up. It didn't solve the problem. I mean, it made. So I was very critical of that kind of sanctioning because it affected the poor people themselves. So I think there's one of the many things to come out of this conversation is a real need to rethink this whole business of sanctions. I think that's very important. So thank you for that. Loren, would you like to comment? You've been listening, and could you tell us more about your education work? Because you were in Nepal and Malaysia. Tell us more about what you were doing and how that might be relevant to, say, South Africa or Zimbabwe, or because you've got a lot of experience as an educator.
I have seen, I want to thank you again, TAMSANQA, for your presentation. And I know this is being recorded, but is the written part of your PowerPoint or something, is that going to be made available to share?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll send it to everyone that's been on the call. Yeah,
that'll be great. Because I see so many parallels to my work in Nepal. They are heavily influenced, even though no one ever actually conquered Nepal, they are very heavily influenced by India. And India, of course, was divided and conquered, well, so to speak, by the British. But so their education system is very similar to that of India. And you see that the focus is only on that exam score and not the person.
Yeah.
But if you go out into the community is very, very much run on the basis of the local councils and of consensus, of cooperation, and they get things done. But when the politicians get involved, and where there's, of course, recently in Nepal, the money that used to be delivered by the national government is now administered by much of the education funds and hospitals and so on are administered locally by the mayor. So that's a new involvement, a new law that has been put into effect, and so that's very good. But I see so many parallels to what you talk about in South Africa and in Zimbabwe, all of those places, and so I have to stop there because I'm just trying to absorb it all. And thank you so much.
And Bharti Jain, who's got to go to another meeting, she's just saying, reminding us that we have the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum Youth and Education Wing. And so if you, TAMSANQA, are in contact with younger people or teachers working with youth, you know, we'd like to get them involved. We have a separate meeting for the youth group on the 12th of each month. We could send invitations out. And Bharti chairs that. I sit on it and give support. And you see, our argument is that, you know, intellecting or thinking is not a prerogative only of older people. It's a right for all of us to think deeply, ask questions, muse, we call it. And young people, when I've taught philosophy in schools, they love it. They love learning about Socrates and Plato and you know, all the galaxy of great philosophers, because kids suddenly realize that it's okay to think and ask questions and engage in dialectic, to use a technical term. So if you know any youngsters, put them in touch with Bharti and me, and we'd love to welcome them into the team. Do you want to add anything, Bharti, before you go?
Yeah, Thomas, I just had an idea regarding this issue with the Zimbabwe education, as we have just launched Agent of Peaceful and Sustainable Change, and the idea behind this is everybody can contribute in their own field, like education. So the idea is, if the schools or educational institutions who are facing such kind of issues, if they come together on such platform, then I think from this platform, we can solve this kind of problem to some extent. Connecting these schools to this platform and providing some regular educational sessions with some other institutions who can provide their services to this platform. So I think from our youth wing, we can start doing that also. And I think, right, there is a problem with the stationaries and everything, but a small investment can be done, as IT is very vast. So such kind of live streaming sessions can be done where only a projector will be needed in a school, and the things can be solved a bit. I think this problem can be solved a bit, not fully, definitely, but can be solved a bit. At least the students who are willing to learn, they can join this platform, and from that we can start some regular classes through some other institutions or teachers. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Bharti. I look forward to, linking that.
Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry I need to leave for my session, and I'll see you in next meeting. And you all of you are invited on the next meeting of Youth Wing on 12th of May.
Yeah, Carl, I'll send Carl the invite. I think he counts as youth. Great. Okay, so a few more thoughts. Dr. Mishra, you've not spoken much. Would you like to make any comments or feedback to TAMSANQA, or ask any questions? As a scientist, it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on all this. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Thomas. First of all, I must say I quite enjoyed TAMSANQA's talk. I felt some of the ideas he took out from my mouth and put it in his lecture. That's the feeling I got. With respect to the comment that I would like to make, I totally agree with you that education has to be made stronger and more relevant. But let me tell you, there is no problem of resources or problem of awakening of the children. There is a problem of real model of teachers. What is happening in the world is there is no connect between teacher and student. To my knowledge, no matter how many sessions you take, no matter how many types of education it will spread, it doesn't go to the head of the student, because the student knows it is just 1 hour activity. Once in a week or maybe 4 times in a month, teacher knows or student knows that this is being done just as a routine. It had no meaning to him or her. So one very important point I want to make is that education has to change and educators have to change. There is no problem with the young people. Young people can be molded, but we are not able to mold them because we do not have right instrument to mold them. I personally feel that in Indian system in olden days, students were taught under the tree and they were best in the world. So I personally feel that resources are the input or the money that we put. it's not very relevant issue to raise quality of education. We can raise quality of education in a very spontaneous way. And I totally agree with you. But TAMSANQA, I have a question to you. All over the world, not necessarily in Zimbabwe, the civil society gets merged with politics. The role of civil society is more a leadership role, neutral to political system. But I find that civil societies get immediately mixed with the power system of the country. As a result, civil society doesn't remain a civil society. That's one question. And second, you very nicely put it that even young people who have very relevant thoughts and very social thoughts in mind, the moment they join the government, they are different. And they are just the government. The way others think, younger people get oriented to that. They don't have that kind of vision that they should make difference as politician, as position of power in the country. So that's one part that worries me, and maybe you can perhaps throw some more light. Thomas, I have a small question to Mr. Saldhana. And that question is that in terms of constitution and adherence to constitution, the whole world is deviating. Nobody likes to adhere to constitution now. And surprisingly, in some countries, now we have seen that they want to do away with the powers of the judiciary. In a country like Israel, country like Pakistan, country like Myanmar, where there is no respect for judiciary anymore. So there is a connection between the political power, social structure, and also the civil society's role in raising the society. So honestly, what you said, that society has to raise, and for that, a very constructive way has to be found out. And I personally, being from education field, I strongly support your idea. And when students come to university level, it's very difficult to reform them. It's very difficult to transform them because they already have set ideas. To my experience, in fact, students start teaching me when I tell them about value system, when I start talking to them about moral system, they ask me a straight question. Sir, this doesn't fit in society when we go out, and I have no answer. So my point is, TAMSANQA, that in the education system, a practical way of teaching and training and the profile model of the teacher has to change if you want to change education and if you want to make youth part of the whole reform system. That's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mishra. TAMSANQA, how is teacher training done in Zimbabwe and indeed South Africa? Do they get a chance to learn how to do the kind of work you're proposing? Have you trained as a teacher yourself ever?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to contribute. I'll start with the question about civic society. The tragedy of African civic society groups that they are donor funded, most of them. The donor community, the outside world, they're interested in controversial issues. We are talking about political rights and civil rights. The issues which had to do with the government of the day, where the government is lacking. And even the press will tend to highlight those issues, which give as if there is an impression that there is a controversy. The government is unable, negative press, bad stories about the government of the day. Stories where the government's activities are being exposed through the work which is done by the civil society, like rigging of elections, That is who's worth it is going to be in the headlines of any paper, that the government or government officials, they are corrupt, they are rigging elections. And they are likely to get funding for such projects or activities within the country. When it comes to positive programs like education, those are boring stories. No one is interested. The donor community will not see the value. It will say, okay, how do you want us to finance this thing, yet the government is corrupt? I think the important thing at the moment is to fund political parties or voices which are opposing the government, or voices which are critical of the system of the day. There is more value in trying to fund those activities than talking about education, which the impact is there, but the world is not interested to say people are being helped in terms of education and the teachers are being oriented to teach schools. But if we come up with it's more about activism. So we're able to stand up and shout from the tallest tree in the country and say, this government must go, these government policies are not right, this is not the best interest of the country. Let's organize a strike, let's stay away from work, let's stay away from schools. We are underpaid, we're overworked, all those things. Those are the stories which are carried out by the press. But stories which are positive, stories which are development, which are to do with development, there's less funding, and then there's less emphasis on those. And then at the end of the day, without funding, without resources, without energy, and without psychology to focus on those particular areas, those areas, they tend to be neglected and they're sidelined at the expense of those activities which are where the politicians are involved and the government is not happy.
Sure, those are important points. Although I did recall the EU giving, realizes the importance of education. So I can only speak that it's doing its bit. Vincent, are you still there? Would you like to comment on the other point that Dr. Mishra made about, the importance of the judiciary and how in some countries in the world, they're trying to sort of abolish the independence of the judiciary. But from what I hear from you in South Africa, the constitution is holding up robustly, is it?
Very much so. Thank you for that, Dr. Mishra. The judiciary all over the world is the key foundational international instruments are the Bangalore Declaration. And literally as judges, we live and die by the declaration. Our independence is sacrosanct. And we are also aware of the judiciary being under pressure in very many countries all over the world, where there's seepages of corruption, totalitarianism, where people's rights are being undermined. The first casualty, of course, is the judiciary. The important thing, of course, is that there are strong international bodies of judiciary. And it's when judges get to talk to one another, to support one another. We support judges all over the world in the same way they've supported us when we go to difficult periods. And so the important thing is that judges must be supporting other judges all over the world. They must be talking to them. They must be reaffirming the principles of the Bangalore Declaration and all the international human rights instruments. But you're right. The judiciary has been the third arm of government, is the most vulnerable, but at the same time can play an extremely important role in just holding the barricades when things are tough, when the executive and the legislature are not performing their constitutional functions. At the end of the day, people look to the judiciary. Ordinary people look to the judiciary, as the last stand for their rights, and we have to vindicate their rights. So thank you for the point. And what it does, it simply reinforms and reaffirms the position that the judges all over the world must be talking and supporting one another. not in an isolated way, in the way judges normally talk and lawyers normally talk, but in forums like this. I'd like to hear more judges in a forum like this of international philosophers and wisdom, because judges also do philosophy in the courts, in our jurisprudence. We try to find solutions to hard and complex issues of the law that affects ordinary people's lives on a day-to-day basis. And we shouldn't simply be talking to one another only on these hard philosophical issues of education systems, ensuring that governments are held accountable around education, around providing proper schooling, what are the international standards in schooling, on making sure that kids have decent toilets, people get food, students get food every day, to be able to sit for 5 or 6 hours in a school. But judges can't do that, as Mr. Mlilo very early on in his presentation said. You can't do it in isolation. You've got to be talking across disciplines. You've got to talk to the scientists, you've got to talk to the educationists, you've got to talk to the philosophers, you've got to talk to people who think budgets and economy in order for us to do this in an integrated fashion. So thank you for having raised that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Vincent. I'd like to just, Ray, we're coming to the end of our meeting. I've got a couple of points to say. About law, our co-chair of our Global Good Governance Commission is a man called Sam Pitroda from India, but he lives in America. He was going to come to the meeting, but there must have been something come up. He's extremely busy. He has told me, and in several meetings, there's a problem in India with the legal system in the fact that there's millions of unheard court cases now before the courts at all levels of the Indian legal system, local courts, all the way up to the High Court in Delhi. And we're not talking just a few, we're talking like millions of unheard cases. And people are therefore in prison without their case coming to court, or they're not able to get justice, although they're trying for 10 years to get recompense for some criminal act or whatever. And this is a really terrible problem in India. And he's trying to start a campaign to use modern technology, including AI, artificial intelligence, to speed up the through rate for justice provision in India, because he is Mr. Indian electronic genius. He actually wired in India into becoming the super cybernetic giant that we all know it is. And I just wondered, Vincent, if you have any, how is it in South Africa in comparison? Is there a logjam of cases waiting to be heard, or are you managing to get them through the system?
Well, I suppose in most countries there's always a backlog, but we're increasingly beginning to embrace technology to be, there's the world before COVID-19 and there's the world after COVID-19. Yeah. What COVID-19 taught many of us across the world is to begin to embrace technology, virtual hearings. And that's fundamentally changed the way we do and the way we're able to deliver justice in South Africa. So increasingly people are able to log in on a virtual hearing. First prize, of course, is for people to be able to come into a courtroom and to experience the process themselves. But increasingly, virtual hearings are being held, backlogs are being held extensively. The problem, of course, is that ordinary people can't afford to log in on a virtual hearing. They don't have the resources, they don't have the computers, and they aren't able to download all the documents that the court hearing entails. So I think, Dr. Daphne, as the world gets more smarter, as COVID has taught us that we need to be embracing technology, that's going to help us in the future. But the important thing is to have access to justice for ordinary people. Ordinary people must be able to have their voices heard in a court. And they must be able to have their voices heard in a court in their own language, not in the legalese, and certainly not in a foreign language like English all the time. We should be allowing for people's voices and their languages and their cultural traits, all of that to be able to permeate our judicial system. So yes, I think there are great strides ahead all over the world around being able to make justice accessible. There are huge movements of access to justice, making sure that there are pro bono legal initiatives and getting lawyers to represent poor people. State legal aid in South Africa, we've got a very strong state legal aid that represents people in criminal matters. Anybody facing a serious offense in this country and who cannot afford legal services must be provided with a lawyer funded by the state. Likewise, in civil matters, we've got a strong pro bono amongst the private profession, and lots of NGOs and law centers at the universities also that assist people with giving them legal advice. But it's building those institutions, not only in South Africa, but elsewhere in Southern Africa and in Africa and elsewhere, not just in the on the continent. And that's where we've learned tremendous from the Australian examples on pro bono legal work, and how they've been able to ensure that indigenous people's rights have been able to been taken to the highest courts in Australia. So yes, access to justice is one of the fundamental pillars of any democracy, in whatever way we choose to define the democracy or we structure it. A judicial system must be underpinned by its credibility and its access and its legitimacy. So thank you for those comments.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. So look, final thoughts from TAMSANQA, just, you know, and then I'm going to finish by reading a poem, because I think as intellectuals, we shouldn't neglect poetry. And I was glad TAMSANQA mentioned you can pass on values via poetry. Sean, did you have any final words as well before we go to TAMSANQA? Do you have a poem to share?
No, I don't. No, thanks very much. And thank you very much for your paper, TAMSANQA. Just one very brief comment. Are you positive about the future, given your experience over the last, say, 20 years in the work you're doing? Are you more positive now, or are you negative? I just wanted to ask you that.
Thank you very much. I'm perpetually optimistic. The future is bright, and the sun will rise tomorrow. And there is always hope. We can't, without hope, we can't live. We can't hope, then we are hopeless. And our future lies in our hands now. And as we're talking about ways of trying to harness the young energies of the young people through schools, we are planting a seed for the future. We might not see that future, but we are planting a seed which will germinate and become something big. And it's going to be, one day the world will come up together and we all sing in unison that we have been able to overcome all these problems which we are currently experiencing. And from every crisis, something positive grows. This is like a learning curve, right? All in a classroom. So at the end of the day, we become something better. I'm sure the world, after the Second World War, it became a better place in terms of resources, in terms of innovations. There are more things now which are in existence, which were not there before the Second World War. Those who experienced in the Second World War during those 5 or 7 years, they thought it was the end of the world. But those who survived, they were able to look back and say, where you are coming from, it was bad. And the way you are now, it is better. Although we aim for the best in the world, let's all live in hope, and that hope will sustain us for eternity.
Very wise words. Thank you. Yes, I mean, I hope we don't have to go through a third world war in our lifetimes, because my parents met during the London Blitz in World War II, and I was brought up to realize the importance of peace. I would hate to think that some people seem to have forgotten that, you know, and so thanks for mentioning World War II. Let's not repeat that mistake, okay? Sean, because we were talking about education and TAMSANQA mentioned it, can you just, you see, education is very political and some cultures try to suppress others. I learned from Sean that the English-speaking people who colonized Ireland prevented the Irish learning in their language, so they had to take to what are called hedge schools. I think we're a kind of a cybernetic hedge school here. Can you explain what a hedge school is, Sean, to some TAMSANQA?
Yes, well, I mean, Dr. Mishra might have mentioned it about India as well, that before pre-colonial in India, a lot of knowledge and wisdom was passed on at a very local level. And I mean, that's really what the hedge schools were in Ireland. Unofficially, maybe elder people took it on themselves, the elders in each small social area, to teach the younger people wisdom, you know, the benefits of truth, of things like that. So I think that's very, it's a very positive contribution from non-Western, because some of that, even in Ireland, is non-Western because it wasn't adopted as part of the Western tradition of passing on knowledge, wisdom, truths, all the benefits, positive. So, that's the background. There was a whole set of laws and legal things in the Celtic tradition for it, which all had to be done away with when colonial powers came in, like when the British came into Ireland. So that's, I don't want to keep you there, so I know we're on over our time now.
No, it's very important, because basically the British forbade the Irish to have education in their own language. So they took to the fields and had schools by the hedge, which is literally what a hedge school was. And Sean worked with educators in Ireland who set up a free University of Ireland to keep that going in higher education, which is so important. So anyway, look, thank you to everyone. Today's meeting was excellent. Thank you for coming, everyone. I'm going to finish with a poem, which I hope will give us a chance to reflect. And we should all go away and do our homework before next month's meeting and write a poem. This is simply called Poets Here Have. Poets here have come up, grown up with the vine. Tough and horny, their gnarled roots like satyrs. So you'd mistake them for pagan priests. But their calls are all of the sea. Their hearts are full of the singing of the conch, round and elliptical as the moon's voyages, and as hard to explain as infinity. This is the heart of a true poet, subtle and indefinable as the sound of the moon as it passes. Yet those with a child's eyes can still stare up in wonder. Little poem to finish. Okay, blessings, brothers, and thank you so much. Yes, I'll send out the poem with the record of the meeting. Thanks for everyone. And I'll see you next month, 30th of the month. Okay. And thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
TAMSANQA, thank you for, and you're welcome to come back to future meetings. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Milo.
Good night.